Alrighty, hey Math 20-3, welcome to lesson 2.2, or sorry, 1.2. We're going to talk about creating a conservative budget. Right. So first, we're going to look at some expenses. Alright, so on your next slide is a table of Josephine's expenses and income for the month of November. So we're going to do two things. Thing number one, we're going to add up all of her expenses, and we have to figure out, are her expenses higher than her income? Is she spending more than she's making? And then we're going to create categories for her expenses. We're going to try to group similar expenses into the same category. For example, two categories could be clothing and another could be rent. So let's do the first thing first, add up all of her expenses. So this is my table. You should have a nicer copy as well. And as you can see, there's her income, and we've got a long list of expenses. So I want you to pause it and add all those up. All right, so I assume you've added them all up. I'm going to show you how I added them up. So what I did, instead of using a calculator, I am using Google Sheets. So all I did was I copied all of her expenses into one column here, and then I'm going to make another cell over here, and I'm going to say, hey, I want that to equal the sum of all of those numbers. And there is my sum. Right, $4,259.87. All right, let's go back to here. So there we go. Ignore all this stuff before. Ignore all this stuff before it. We just want that number. That is her expenses. I just copied and pasted it from my Google Sheets. Now, if you want me to show you how to do that or to do anything else cool on Google Sheets, just ask. So these are my expenses. Right, now, are they higher than her income? Let's take a look. Her income was 4,325. 4,325. That was her income. So, no, she's making a little bit more money than she is spending. Which is, now for number two, it says create categories for her expenses and to group similar expenses into the same category. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at all of her expenses, and I want you to put them into similar categories, not just the first 10, I want all of them. So for example, you could say that, hey, the oil change and fuel, those both have to do with her car, so maybe I'm going to have a category called car expenses, right? And you could say, hey, groceries, pizza, and the restaurant, all those are food, so that can be in a food category. So I want you to try to do that on your own and then compare it with mine. There's not really any right or wrong answers here, as long as you try to group them together. Now, what I like to do, this isn't necessarily the best way or the only way, but what I like to do is I like to group them based off the store, right? So, for example, this isn't necessarily the best way to do it, but for my own budgeting, I put my cleaning supplies and my food in the same category because I get them both from the same store. Right? It just makes my going through my receipts a little bit easier. Now, I want you to pause it and try to do that on your own and then compare. So, while you were paused and making your list of categories, I made my list as well. So, I made a little table. I made my table here, my category and my thing. Okay. So my first category was rent. Rent typically has its own category even though it's only one thing in it. Right. It has its own category because chances are it'll be your biggest expense. I put medical and cosmetics together because, at least for myself, if I was getting anything cosmetic related, I would get it from the drugstore, same as I would get my prescriptions from. Right, I've got food together, so I got groceries, takeout, and restaurants. All that falls into my food category. Withdrawals, that's a cool category. Um, so you're not really spending that money per se. So when you take money out from the ATM, but you kind of count it as spent because it's not in your account anymore. Also, that way, if you count it as spent when you take it from the ATM, you can kind of spend it on whatever you want without having to account for it other spots. My unexpected or other category, things that you're not expecting. So gifts, repairs, things like that. In the car category, I put my fuel, insurance, oil changes, and any sort of regular maintenance. And apparently I put fuel twice. Insurance. So I got my life insurance and my car insurance. Car insurance could go under either one, okay? Depending on how you feel. However, make sure when you do your own budget that you don't put it in both, because you're only paying it once. It only needs to go one spot on your budget. Utilities, for her, that's cable and phone, but it could be things like your heating bill or your water bill. Clothing, obviously, is anything that's clothing. I made a travel category for her airfare, her motel, and her taxi. And I made a recreation category for things that are fun, like skis, movies, and books. Right? Your categories may be the same, they might be different, that's okay. Um, you want to have kind of the fewer the categories, the better, but you don't want them so broad that everything goes into the same category. Okay? You got to find that balance. Right, so I just want to do a couple definitions and then we'll get on to the next lesson. So when we make budgets, we're going to be making what we call a conservative budget. Now, what a conservative budget is, first off, what a budget is simply, it's a plan for your money. Whoops. It's a plan for your money. Okay, and that's a good thing to have. Now, a conservative budget is where your expenses are less than your income. All right, that's important. This is to ensure that you don't, run out of money. Okay, you don't want to get into the habit of spending more money. It's supposed to be an N. Of spending more money than you have. Right. Or a more, I guess, wordy definition is a conservative budget is designed so that at the end of the month you have a surplus. Okay, that's a U there. Surplus. And not a deficit. Now, surplus and deficit. What that means, a surplus is when your expenses are less than income. Expenses are less than income. In other words, what that means is you have extra money. You have money left over at the end of each month. Now, what a deficit means, I'll write that in red, is when expenses are more than your income. Okay, what that means is you don't have enough money. And what that leads to is debt. Right? Sometimes debt is unavoidable, but if you can budget accordingly, it's nice to try to avoid it. All right? So, on the next lesson, what we're going to do is create a conservative budget based on an example of expenses. Cool.